So hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Black MBA Association's Gold Key webinar series. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of this web event technology. At any time, you may adjust your audio using your computer volume settings. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a Q&A window. To submit a question, type your question in the small text box at the bottom, and when you're finished, click the Send button. You may do this at any time during the program for either of our presenters today. All questions that you submit are only seen by today's presenters. Questions will be responded to in the order in which they are received and will be addressed at the end of the presentation. However, please note that due to time constraints, our speakers may not respond to all questions that are submitted. At this time, I would like to introduce our speakers, Dr. Victoria E. Jones. Victoria is president of North Point Group Enterprises, a consultancy focused on leadership, development, and talent planning. She's recognized as a leadership development expert and has extensive experience in collaborating with organizations to build leadership talent, which is aligned with strategies, mission-critical business goals, and objectives. Victoria led the leadership development practice in a Fortune 10 company as well as a higher education organization. She is certified John Maxwell team coach, teacher, and speaker. She is committed to the success of organizations by providing innovative learning solutions that build and maximize essential skills and capabilities necessary to win in a highly competitive marketplace. For more information, please visit www.solutionsbynorthpoint.com. I would also like to introduce Gary Dent from the Divine Group. And at this time, I will turn things over to our first speaker, Gary, to get us started.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Dent. I'm a principal and managing member with the Divine Group. We have created a strategic alliance with the National Black MBA Association by providing it with assessments for its Gold Key members. It would allow them to look at their accomplishments and development opportunities to move forward into executive positions. Our assessments are about 20 minutes, and it provides organizations with the ability to acquire, manage, and develop senior leaders. So we're really pleased that we can offer this to the National Black MBA Association, and we ask that each of the Gold Key members would take our assessments and also take advantage of receiving coaching from our professionals. So with that, I'd like to introduce Vicki. And Vicki, we're so proud that you're able to be with us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to have this opportunity to spend some time to talk about the topic of strategy. And first of all, I want to thank Stephanie for the introduction. I really appreciate it. And I want to do a shout out to Gary Dent for providing this opportunity to spend some time in talking about the topic of strategy and why it's important to leadership. I congratulate the National Black MBA Association for making this webinar series available to the Gold Key members because I think strategy is one of those key topics that's really essential to leadership capability. So we will get started. Thank you so much for being here. So our agenda for today, first of all, we've been through the introductions, and we'll spend some time talking about leadership and strategy and why it's important in today's contemporary environment. We'll also spend some time talking about the assessment results, and thank you to all who participated in the assessment. We had a 50% response rate, which is really terrific, and I thank you for that. And then finally, we'll spend some time talking about strategies for success, what you can do to build your toolkit in responding in strategic ways to issues that face leaders in today's environment. So with that, we will get started. So that we all have a similar framework around how we think about leadership, I thought that I would give you some foundation for how to look at strategy in the broader vision of leadership. And so when we think about leaders, there are three basic things that organizations look for. One is, can that leader be strategic? Can he or she read between the lines? Can they see potential trends coming? And can they be responsive in a way that adds value to an organization? So strategy is one component of leadership. The second component of leadership is that of business results. Can the leader build a budget and operate to that budget? Can they get results for the organization? And then the third component is, are they people developers? Can they spot talent? Can they grow that talent and advance that talent? So those are the three pillars of leadership, and this is really a universal principle for those of us who work in the space of leadership development. So our time today is going to be spent on this topic of strategy, and we'll broaden your view with regard to how you look at strategy. And the point that I would also make on this particular slide is that as leaders, you can have the best strategies and you can get great results, but without people, you will always sub-optimize. So I want you to remember that principle. And then the other thing that I would point out with regard to this particular framework is that when you look back over how you spent your time over 30 days, you should be spending a third of your time on strategy, a third of your time on results, and a third of your time in developing people. So with that, let's move on to some questions that you should consider as leaders within your organization specific to strategy. One question is, do you have the right networks to help you see opportunities before your competition sees that opportunity? That's really an important question for your consideration and review. Secondly, are you comfortable in challenging your own assumptions or the assumptions of others? Because assumptions can tend to get in the way when we think about strategy and when we think about change. So that's a very important question for you to consider. The third question is, can you get a diverse group to buy into a common vision? Gaining alignment around strategy is one of the most critical roles that you will play in managing and developing and executing strategy, getting all the arrows pointed in the same way. And then the final question for you to consider is, do you learn from mistakes? So even when you're wildly successful on a project, you should always take time to look back and do what I refer to as an after-action review to determine what worked, what didn't work, and what would you do differently? Those are the three questions when you're thinking about learning from your mistakes. And many times what we do is especially when we're successful on a project, we don't take the time to look back to see what were those key success factors and what might have gotten in the way to even a higher level of performance. And so do please consider those questions as you think about your role as a strategic leader within your organization. So moving on, when we think about the challenges that we face as leaders, we want to think about solutions that will get us to an optimal result. And many times what we do is we look at that yellow arrow and we say, or that gold arrow, and we say we need to get from point A to point B, and we're going to take a straight line or a linear approach to resolution. So most of us know that that's not how the world of business works. it will take many twists and turns and options to consider to resolve challenges that you have within your organization. And so this is meant to bring awareness around. There's generally not a straight line approach to resolving challenges within organizations. And it takes the leader to be flexible and agile in considering the most optimal solutions that would work to solve in an organization. The next point that I want to make is with regard to the survey results. So hopefully everyone has read the article, Strategic Leadership, The Essential Skills. In that article, there were 6 skills that were identified that points to this being a skill set that's required in order for you to be a strategic leader. Those 6 skills, the first one is to anticipate, having the ability to see beyond what is today and what's going on in the environment, both inside your organization as well as outside of your organization, as well as your industries. So having a broad look at, what's going on that may shift the market environment that will prepare you for the change that is about to happen or may happen within your organization. So that's skill 1. Skill 2 is challenge, questioning the assumptions within your organization, questioning the industry assumptions that may be occurring, and being willing, actually, to get outside of your comfort zone. Because if you stay within your comfort zone, you'll make assumptions that may not necessarily hold true. So being willing to challenge the status quo, that's very important. The third skill is that of interpretation. Can you interpret the data that's coming at you? And sometimes when you think about it, that data is going to come at you in many directions. And think about the chart with all the arrows and then the gold arrow. Generally, information doesn't come to you in a way that's linear or straightforward. And sometimes the pulse of the indicator is weak. And so it's important to pay attention even to those weak signals so that you have the ability to interpret and make sense of what's in front of you. The fourth skill is that of decision. Can you make decisions based on multiple options, multiple input that you're receiving that allows you the ability to look at options and understand what's the optimal option to consider for the set of circumstances within your organization. The fifth skill is that of alignment, and that goes back to an earlier comment around can you gain alignment with key stakeholders to ensure that change can happen. And I'll pause to say that strategies really represent a set of change alternatives and options. And so getting alignment to this new vision so that it's a shared vision is really important. And then finally, do you have the ability to learn? Can you continuously look at what's going on strategically inside as well as external to your organization to continue to bring about improvement in performance within your organization and ensure that you have the key decision-making processes in place that includes all stakeholders so that you have the important stakeholders aligned with the new direction that is needed in order to stay competitive within your industry. So those six skills are critical and key, and we'll talk about some strategies around how do you build that muscle, those 6 muscles to ensure that you have the strategic capability necessary and needed to add value to your organizations. So that takes us to our homework assignment or pre-work assignment that was introduced to us by the article, Strategic Leadership, The Essential Skills. And I'm happy to report that 14 people did respond to the survey, which gives us important insight in terms of where we are as a cohort that's participating in this webinar today. So that's a 50% response rate. I believe we had 28 people who signed up for this webinar. So very happy to report a 50% response rate to the survey. And the survey was aimed at helping us to understand as individuals, how do we self-assess ourselves against the 6 key capabilities necessary to be strategic in your leadership role. So the first question, gather information from a wide network of experts and sources, both inside and outside your industry or function. And the 14 responses you see there on the screen, and there's a varied reaction in terms of your self-assessment, in terms of how you are doing. And so while this is a critical capability to have, just understand where you are as a leader and where you might need to add greater capability in this particular area, because this is an essential capability to have in terms of always looking for information that impacts what you're doing for your organization and information that may drive new direction and new change. So again, a wide variety of how you responded to this question, and we can see that there are some of you who have strong capability, and then there are others where you recognize that this is an area of development and will require additional focus. So that was question number 1. And I should also point out that there are 2 questions per skill set. So there's a total of 12 questions that we will cover, and then we'll get into strategies to build greater capability with these 6 skills. The second question, the ability to predict competitors' potential moves and likely reactions to new initiatives or products. Now, this is an important question because it's critical, it's essential for leaders to evaluate and do environmental scans in terms of what your competitors are doing. And from previous experience with a very large company, this was an area that did draw some challenge for the organization, because what happens, and I'll just pause to say this, sometimes when you're highly successful, you're not really interested in what your competitors are doing. And I will say to you that it's critically important for you to understand deeply and comprehensively what's going on with your competitors. And sometimes it even means not necessarily looking at a competitor, but at an industry that may be related to work that you do. And so I'll give you an example. In the automobile manufacturing industry, it's basically a manufacturing it's basically a manufacturing industry. But now, because of what customers are requesting, it has become important for the automotive makers to understand technology as well. 20 years ago, technology didn't matter that much in that particular industry. In today's competitive environment, it's highly important. So my point here is that watching and doing environmental scans and benchmarking of your competitors and or related industries, highly important. The response is showing again that we have participants on the highly capable in this area, and then we have some participants who recognize that this is an area of development. And so, again, a wide variety of how capable this particular cohort is, and the point that I would make, this is a essential factor in being strategic in your approach to the value that you add to your organizations. The third question, reframe a problem from several angles to understand root causes. This again is an essential capability that we as strategic leaders, we're not only looking at these superficial outcome of what's going on, but we have the ability to dig deep to get to the root cause, because it's always better to solve at the root cause level versus the superficial level, because the superficial result is not going to totally fix the problem. Only when you get at that root cause will that problem be corrected. In our response, again, we have some of our participants highly capable in this area, others who need development in this area, and we'll talk about some success factors to make that happen. Next question, seek out diverse views to see multiple sides of an issue. Very important in the world of strategic leadership. Our response here is varied again, where we have highly capable participants and some that are in the midst of building that capability. Again, it's important to see an issue from multiple perspectives and to seek multiple perspectives. Sometimes, when we think about trying to make it happen and to get the result and so forth, we tend to look for people who agree with us. That's a bad move. That's a bad move. You want that multiple perspective, because then you start to consider some assumptions that you may be making that may not hold true, and there are others who may have an insight that you hadn't considered, and it will make for a better solution if you consider that option. So seek those multiple diverse views, particularly from key stakeholders within the organization. The next question, demonstrate curiosity and an open mind. Curiosity is also related to the ability around learning, but it's important to keep an open mind. In fact, leaders who are closed-minded, we refer to those leaders as capped learners. And a capped learner, it's difficult and it can be challenging to have a capped learner consider alternatives. And, perhaps that will get in the way of an optimal solution. So it's important to keep that curiosity at the forefront and to keep an open mind around alternatives that should be considered. The sixth question is test multiple working hypotheses with others before coming to conclusion. And I should underline the word before, because first of all, it's important to have many hypotheses in consideration when you're looking for optimal solutions. And it's also important to test out your thinking. It's actually a critical thinking capability, but test it out before you come to conclusion, because many times when you test, you'll determine, this may not be the best option for this particular situation or business challenge that we're faced with. And I see that the response rate, we have some capability here, again, a wide variety of capability, and so this means that there's certainly room for, in your toolkit, to add some additional insights around this question. The seventh question, and this is dealing with the skill set around decide, is to balance long-term investment for growth versus short-term pressures for results. And I'm going to pause here because there was a slide that I shared with you earlier that talked about the 3 pillars of leadership. One being strategy, one being business results, and one being people development. Where leaders tend to want to spend their time is on that middle pillar, on getting the results. Leaders want to check the box, and I will share with you that many times that need and that desire can get in the way of strategy. So you have to do some analysis around the long-term vision that you're trying to achieve versus a short-term result that you may want to achieve. And this is an area where I see, again, the respondents had a variety of capability in terms of being able to demonstrate this capability. And so what's important is when we look at those key success factors, depending on how you self-assessed on this particular question, will determine how these key success factors can help you. So again, this question is related to decide, the ability to around decision making. Sorry about that. I have a bit of a tickle in my throat. So the 8th question is determine trade-offs, risk, and unintended consequences for customers and other key stakeholders when making decisions. This is, again, a very important capability in the world of strategy that you're assessing trade-offs as well as risk, so that you're coming away with optimal solutions for your customer and other stakeholders. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so the response rate or the response to this particular question, we have some strong capability with this particular group. This is one of the highest performing questions that we had, so bravo to you on that. So our next skill that we're looking at is that of alignment. And the question is assess stakeholders' tolerance and motivation for change. And you heard me share earlier that change, that strategies really represent a change management approach to making it happen. And so doing assessments around readiness for change is really essential. And as we can see with this response, we have some of our participants that's really good in this area, others that, there's further development that would be beneficial. But again, it's important to think about strategy as a set of change measures, and that understanding where the stakeholders are with regard to tolerance for change, and are they motivated to change? Is there readiness there? An essential aspect of strategic leadership. The second question on this one is, can you pinpoint and address conflicting interests among stakeholders? And this is, in the change management world, we refer to this as stakeholder management. So when you understand, it's important to understand who are the stakeholders that can impact and influence this strategy, and being aware of, so how do you bring about competing or conflicting interests so that everyone is headed in the same direction on this particular strategy? Because without that shared and common vision for the strategy, it's tough to optimize on that strategy. So taking time to understand where stakeholders are is really an important function, and the survey is showing us that we have some strong capability in this area, as well as some areas for development. And then the final skill is that of learning. And so the question number 11 is communicate stories about success and failure to promote institutional learning. And sometimes I get asked the question, well, why would we talk about failure? And I can share with you, and many leaders will say this to you, the most important lessons ever learned in leadership are stories related to failure. And it is essential to understand when you know, what were the key success factors, but also what got in the way when there was a failure, or what got in the way when you sub-optimized, when you actually achieved the success, but you could have had a greater success. It's important for leaders to think about that and understand that, so that you know, their path forward is understanding what worked and what didn't work, and what did we learn, and what should we institutionalize from these learnings. This was the highest performing element on all of the surveys, so very strong capability on this particular component related to learning. And then the 12th and final question is, course correct on the basis of disconfirming evidence even after a decision has been made. Very important capability to have, because there are times when a decision is made, but you get another piece of data, or you review data that you have and you determine that the decision made was not the right decision. To have a willingness to do that correction so that you don't go down that path where you know it is not the optimal solution for an organization. This requires great agility and flexibility in terms of your leadership style. And we have strong capability in this area as well. And so there are some participants where there is some enhancement or development needed, but overall we have strong capability in this area. So those are the survey results. Again, I say thank you to all who participated in the survey. And so that takes us to our next component of the webinar. And so the question is, based on the survey results, what insights did you gain? What's one key insight gained from the assessment results based on the 6 skills that were covered in the survey? What I'd like for you to do is type your answer in, and we'll give you a minute or so to get your answers in, and then once the answers start to come in, we will close the poll, and we'll take a look at some of the insights that you've decided to share with us. And while you're responding to the poll, I do have a question from Rodney Thomas, and Rodney's question is the ideal score a rank of 7 across all measures? And Rodney, that is the ideal score. So if you are very strong in your leadership capability, you would assess yourself as being very strong, and then, of course, that's a score of 7. And so that's ideally where you want to be as a strategic leader. Now, I will also say with regard to that question that there's no such thing as a perfect strategic leader, because leadership is a learned behavior, and learning is for a lifetime. So even when you've been wildly successful, your environment is constantly changing. So that means that you're constantly on a learning path, and so you never really arrive because the world continues to change. So I hope that is responsive to your question. And we'll just see. So let's close the poll to see the 4 answers that we have. Okay. So the first answer is, and this is a great insight, self-awareness in recognizing what worked and what did not work, even when projects are successful. That is so true. That is so true because, again, I'll make the point, we can be wildly successful, but there are times when we could have done things differently to even take that standard of performance up to another level. So very good insight. Thank you to the participant who offered that. The next answer, just better understanding how much one's network plays to furthering strategic leadership. Another very interesting comment because, your networks are essential to your ability to continue to grow. If you hang out only with people just like you in the same industry, in the same profession, in the same function, it limits your ability to see the world on a broader base. So that is a great insight, and I thank you for that. Let's see what the next one. Using framing to get to root cause rather than only considering the issue from a single view. Another great insight. Root cause analysis is very important. We'll talk about a couple of strategies related to root cause analysis. So thank you to the participant who offered that. And let's see. I think that's it. So thank you very much for responding to the poll. Your engagement is very much appreciated. We will move on, and we're going to take a look at, when you consider the 6 skills that we talked about: anticipate, challenge, interpret, decide, align, and learn. These are skills that we know that we need to be effective leaders in a strategic role. And now we're going to talk about some strategies to help us to develop those skills. And so I will pause here also to say that our time together, we're 14 minutes away from the close of our time together, and I will get all 6 skills covered. And as it was shared with you earlier, there may be some questions that we won't get to, but I think it's important that I stay committed to the time, because I know that many of you are in the middle of your workday, and I just appreciate your taking the time to spend this conversation together. And so if I don't get to any unanswered questions, I apologize for that. But if you send me an email, I'll be happy to respond beyond this webinar. So the first skill, that is the skill of anticipate. And we talked about what that involved. And here are some ideas that can help you to develop stronger skills. For those of you who rated yourself 4 or below, these are some areas that can strengthen your capability. And for those who ranked yourself 5 and above, these are still some considerations for you to keep in mind as you want to continue to maintain that strength and capability, and not be not take it for granted that it will always be there. These are the kinds of things that you need to consider when you're developing a skill set around anticipate. And you see that there are, 6 different ideas. Most importantly, always engage your customers. And I will say this to you, not just engage your customers, but listen to your customers, because many times we get a sneak preview of what's next by what your customer is asking for. So be sure to listen to your customer, and be sure that you're conducting market research so that you remain contemporary and fresh on what's going on in the market. And then you see the arrow pointed to, in fact, I'll do something here, and that is use scenario planning to imagine what the future would look like. The key with scenario planning is that it gets you out of current state. It causes you to think about, how could this product be better if nothing got in the way for our company? And it takes that scenario planning can take you to a different place, and that's really critical in terms of envisioning what future success may look like. So that's a critical factor in building your ability to anticipate what's coming. The next skill is that of the skill of challenge. And as you can see, it's important on that factor, too, that you question and examine some long-term assumptions that you've made within your company or within your industry that may not necessarily hold true when you look at the future. And so, again, be proactive in questioning the assumptions that you're making within your organization to ensure that you're being futuristic and you're thinking about, what are the customer needs today, but also what are those needs in the future, more importantly. And also be willing to consider divergent views. Sometimes the naysayer, many people will say, I wish the naysayers would go away. I'll ask you to think about that in a different way, because naysayers tend to think about what might go wrong and what may get in the way. And when you're thinking about strategy, you want to at least consider those forces that may get in the way of success. So it's important to challenge. It's important to question assumptions, and these are some ideas that will help you do that, to build that challenge capability. The third skill is that of interpretation, or interpret, that you want to take a look at data, and as we talked about earlier, particularly as you think about anticipating what's coming, that first skill, you want to consider data points. And we're suggesting at least 3 possible interpretations of that data, which means that calls for a diverse stakeholder group. And what we mean by that is you don't want people in the room who all think like you. You don't want only stakeholders in the room who's from the same function as yours. You need a cross representation of functions. You need marketing. You need the strategic planning folks. You need the financial folks. You need the engineers. You need the manufacturing folks. And I have to put in a plug, you need the HR folks in the room, because it's that multiple perspective that is going to help you understand the possibilities of what the data is saying to you. You want the ability to be able to zoom in and out of the big picture, where there are big picture folks that are in the room, but you also want those folks who are going to look at the granular details. So that's all important when you think about what it takes to get good insight and good data in terms of how you're interpreting what the data is saying to you. That 4th skill is that of decision-making, or to decide. And the one I highlighted on this particular slide is to think through who needs to be involved. Again, that's stakeholder management. To get the right stakeholders in the room, looking at the data, that can help you decide what is the best solution based on what the data is telling us, and the data is being interpreted by multiple stakeholders who are diverse. Very, very important to the process of the decision-making process. And then the 5th skill is that of alignment. And, one of the ideas that I want to point to here is that you have pros and cons in terms of the internal and external stakeholders on how this, how to address the data, and how this data is aligned or misaligned with strategy. When there is alignment, there's a clear path forward. But when the data is misaligned with current strategy, it causes you to revisit, is this strategy contemporary based on this new knowledge that we've gained in our analytics and the data that has been drawn from the analytics. So very important capability, but there are other ideas that are shared with you as well. And so we are now at poll number 2. So I would ask that you reflect on what has been shared and think about what is one action you can take today to increase your strategic capability from the lessons that have been learned as a result of this webinar. Just one action. What one action can you take that will increase your strategic capability? And your strategic capability is based on the 6 skills that we have talked about. I will give you a moment to respond to that question. And I will start to address the question since we're drawing near to the close of our webinar. This is a great insight. I love it. Include naysayers more often. That's a really good insight, because naysayers will help you understand the barriers that may get in the way of success. So you don't want to discount them. There's a tool that we use in the change management world called the force field analysis. And with the force field analysis, on one side of the chart, you talk about what are the accelerators that will help you achieve the success that you're looking for. And on the other side of the chart, you talk about what are the barriers that get in the way, and so the force field analysis causes you to develop a strategy to address the barriers, because if you're not considering the barriers and you haven't developed strategies to effectively manage those barriers, again, you're going to suboptimize performance. So that is really important. Another response is to include a diverse group of decision makers. That's a very good insight, and that's a very good action to take, because it's really critical that you have multiple views, because people see and stakeholders see issues from different perspectives, and in the strategy world, you have to consider all perspectives that's there. And then another insight in terms of an action is to increase my subject matter expertise to seek to further establish myself as an expert within my progression. And that's a great insight, because as I shared with you, leadership is a lifelong journey. And I've been in the leadership business for a long time, and I have to share with you that I learn every day. I gain an insight every day. In preparing for our webinar today, I was doing my research. I was analyzing the results that came in from the survey, and I gained perspective around the leaders within this particular program, where the strengths are and how the National Black MBA Association can play to the area where there's greater development that's needed. And so very important in terms of how we can take action going forward to expand our capabilities. So that brings us to the call to action. And what I would say to each and every one of you is, you want to take time to to share your insights with your organizations about today's webinar on strategy and the potential implications to your organization. And so there are 4 questions for your consideration as you think about how you will share this information back with your organization or with teams that you lead. The first question is, what insights did you gain about strategy and leadership from this webinar? And what are some new strategies you should try as a result of these insights? And think about what obstacles may get in the way to accomplish what it is that you want to do from the learnings from this webinar. And then, finally, how will you address the obstacles? I shared this with you earlier in our time together. If you don't have a game plan to deal with barriers, they will be just that, barriers. And so you want to think about removing barriers that might get in the way of your expanding your leadership capability from a strategic standpoint and adding greater value to the organizations in which you operate. So we're right at the 1 o'clock hour, and I'm looking at the Q&A panel, and I do not see any further questions. So I will say to you, thank you so very much for joining us for this webinar specific to strategy. I do hope that you gained some new knowledge, new skills, new capabilities and abilities, and that this information can be shared in a way that allows you to make even greater contributions and to add deeper value to your organizations. Thank you so very much for spending an hour talking about strategy. I do wish you great success. And again, I congratulate the National Black MBA Association for making this webinar available to its Gold Key membership. And to all of those who supported me in this process, to Stacy and Robin, and to all who helped me with getting prepared for today, thank you, thank you, thank you. And a shout out to Gary Dent for thinking of me as a speaker for the webinar series. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
On behalf of NBMBA, I would like to thank our presenter, Dr. Victoria Jones, for a fantastic program, and you, the audience, for your participation in today's event. This concludes today's program. Thank you so much, and have a great day.